Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 41 of the Fair Housing Insiders. We have with us today Leslie Tucker from Williams, Edelstein and Tucker, and we're going to talk about fair housing testing today. And a couple of questions we're going to be covering. One, who can be a tester? And what are some different testing methods that are out there? So Leslie, welcome again to the show. We're always glad to have you with us.
Yes, always glad to be here. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, so thank you for helping us out with a common challenge that people on site face, and that's when a fair housing tester shows up at their property or calls them. So can you give us a little insight into those questions, like who can be a tester and what are some different methods that they're using right now?
Sure, yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with the testing process, testing occurs when an individual contacts your property. These individuals are typically going to be working with some type of agency, a state fair housing group, a private fair housing advocacy group, the Department of Justice, something like that. So an individual working with these groups will contact your property in a variety of different methods. And they're going to be asking you about, how to apply, what it's like there, different questions about tenancy. These people don't want to live at your property. They don't have any interest in applying or living there. They're just pretending. So these questions are, they're specifically focused on figuring out whether you're going to say something or do something that might be a fair housing violation. Whether it violates your state fair housing laws or the Federal Fair Housing Act, that's what they are trying to get at. And sometimes the questions that they ask you are going to be very leading and hopefully should put up some red flags in your mind that, hey, I might be talking to a tester because they're asking me about A, B, and C. And you really need to be on your guard to make sure that you're not saying anything or doing anything that could be interpreted as a violation. We're going to talk about some kind of specific examples of what might be some topics they ask about. And like we said, the methods of contact can vary from test to test. The majority of testing nowadays is done via telephone. And I think for obvious reasons, those being that telephone testing is very cheap. They don't have to pay these people to visit anywhere or for their, for more time for travel. It's easy. They can get multiple tests done in a day, whereas, in-person testing takes a little bit longer, but in-person testing still does occur. Be aware of that. Testing can also occur via email, or if you have social media platforms set up where people can contact you to ask questions. That's also starting to be a more common method of contact as well for tests. So all around the board, you're not really safe from testers from any particular method of contact. So just be aware that any contact with your property could potentially be a test.
Right. And it's something that on-site professionals, they're pretty used to. I mean, besides fair housing testers, a lot of property management companies are using mystery shops as a way to gauge performance from their on-site leasing professionals and managers. So this is pretty common, and communities should be used to it, right?
And a lot of people are surprised by the fact that these testers, considering that they really have no interest in the properties, they don't intend to apply or to move in. Why do they have a right to file a complaint against me or to sue me if they don't have any true interest in my property?
Right.
And that's really, I know that's confusing for people. And unfortunately, it's just the law. The courts have established very clearly that testers do have standing to bring a suit based on these tests against housing providers.
Right. Yep. So got to deal with it, right? So let's look at a couple of scenarios and we'll get your feedback on that. I know that will help our audience kind of visualize what may has already happened to them or prepare them for something that could happen in the future. So our first scenario is a caller that asks about bringing a pet, but the leasing professional doesn't ask the right questions. So let's look at this scenario and we'll get your comments on it, Leslie.
Good morning. I'm thinking about applying at your property, but I wanted to make sure I'd be able to bring my dog. Is he allowed to live there?
Yes, we are pet friendly here. You would just be required to pay a $200 pet deposit. However, we do have some breed restrictions. What type of dog is he?
He's a German Shepherd.
I'm sorry, that is one of the restricted breeds. He wouldn't be permitted to live with you at this property.
So Jonathan, in this situation, this is an extremely common topic being tested. And I think that the reason that it's so commonly tested is because so many people get it wrong. And you just kind of need to know what to do when you're faced with this situation. So I'm glad we're talking about it. The caller, the tester in this situation, just basically said, "Can I bring my dog?" There was no mention of whether the dog was a pet. There was no mention of whether the dog was an assistance animal. She just said, "Can I bring my dog?" The agent immediately jumped right into what the property's pet policy is. He made an assumption, and that kind of assumption is exactly what the testers were looking for. And they're going to immediately, basically find that there's a violation here.
Right.
So it's so important that when you get animal calls, you don't make assumptions that the caller is talking about a pet or talking about an assistance animal. And I think testers intentionally leave it sometimes vague for that very purpose. So it's absolutely okay to talk about what your pet policy is. If you require a pet deposit, that's fine to talk about. If you have pet restrictions or weight restrictions, that's okay to talk about too. However, it's super important if you're going to talk about your pet policy that you follow it up with your assistance animal policy, which doesn't matter what type of property you are, you have an assistance animal policy, right? Because it's the law. So don't let these callers trip you up, whether you're talking to someone in person or a caller. Don't let them trip you up by confusing you with animal questions. Just give both policies and don't make a call whether any particular animal is going to be allowed on the property on a phone call. That happens, during your application process. So don't give a yes or a no. Talk about your policies, and then you're basically safe from testers in that way.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation. Great scenario and a great reminders for all of our audience. So let's take a look at our second scenario and we'll get your feedback on that now.
Hello, I'm interested in this property. Can I come take a tour?
Absolutely. Come by anytime today.
I should mention that I use a wheelchair. Is this property accessible so I can get around?
Actually, this property was built before all those accessibility laws were passed, so we do have a lot of stairs. I can recommend another property that is more accessible if you'd like.
So Jonathan, this is a good scenario, a testing scenario, because the tester has asked a question that the agent is just responding very honestly to. There's no indication that the employee here has any sort of ill will or is acting, intentionally discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, because the employee has, told the truth and said, "Oh, well, actually, our property is not accessible. It has stairs, or, for whatever reason, it is not accessible." That response has now effectively discouraged this, potential applicant, for all this person knows, from applying. And they've kind of steered them to another property that is accessible. That is discrimination based on a disability. And this very well could end up, in a lawsuit or a fair housing complaint because of this response, because of this test. It very well may be true that the property is not accessible. And for lots of properties, that's not illegal. If a property is built prior to 1991, which is when the Fair Housing Act accessibility requirements went into effect, there's a lot of properties that just aren't accessible. And that's okay. That's just the way it is. So it very well may be true. There's stairs, there's not ramps. The units may not be accessible because they're old. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to tell everyone about the fact that your property is not accessible. The correct answer, the more appropriate answer in this scenario, I think, would have been for the employee to say, why don't you come on by and take a tour, and you can kind of decide if you'd feel comfortable here. The employee could also, direct a caller to their website if the website has pictures of the community or the units or something like that. So the person can get a better idea of what the community may look like. But the point is, you as an employee, as management, are not giving information that may discourage the person from applying. Always be welcoming, always encourage people to apply, regardless of what they're saying. Here, it's, about the fact that they use a wheelchair. Come on by, put in an application, come take a tour, always be welcoming. Other scenarios that might involve this are if someone calls about their criminal history, come on in, fill out an application, we'll process it. From a sales perspective, that's always the best policy, right? Is to always encourage people to come on in and put in an application, and then you'll process it according to your policies, but never ever discourage people, regardless of kind of what they're asking you.
That's excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for that explanation. A nice little visual there from a sales perspective to help all of our audience. So Leslie, thank you so much for those answers. We are introducing a new fun way to end up our shows, and it's called the Fair Housing Fast Five. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, put you on the spot here, and let's see if you can answer them in less than 60 seconds. So 5 questions, less than 60 seconds. Are you nervous?
Well, yeah, 60 seconds is a minute. So we'll see if I can do that.
I know, it's like, this is going to be so much fun though. It's like, we're doing game show here. Let's liven it up for our audience, and see if you would answer the questions in the same way. So 5 questions, 60 seconds on the clock. I'm going to time it, and we are going to hit the clock. And are you ready?
I suppose.
Okay, here we go. Hitting the clock now. Question number 1. Who can be a tester?
People who work for agencies, private, DOJ, state fair housing agencies.
Awesome. What are some different testing methods?
In person, telephone, email, social media.
Beautiful. What might testers ask about?
Oh gosh, a number of topics. Availability, criminal history, occupancy, animals, accessibility.
What happens if a tester finds a violation?
They can file a fair housing complaint with HUD within a year of the test, or they can file a lawsuit within 2 years of the test.
What's the best way to answer an animal question?
Talk about your pet policy if you have one. Always talk about your assistance animal policy as well, and never give a definite yes or no about any animal question.
That was awesome. Almost. That was about 68, 70 seconds. So just over the time. But that was great though. It is really difficult to answer that fair housing questions like that in under 60 seconds. So thank you for playing and tuning into our show. Thank you so much.
Thanks. That was fun.
Glad to have you on the show. We're looking forward to having you again, Leslie, on future episodes here in 2022. And for our audience, thank you so much for participating. We really appreciate your feedback on our YouTube channel and Instagram. If you have any questions you would like for future episodes, be sure to keep those coming in. We're going to have a future show that we're going to be highlighting your questions that you have. So please remember to share those with us. And we look forward to answering them in a future episode. So this has been episode 41. Thank you, wonderful community. Thank you again, Leslie. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.